What's happening, everybody? On today's show, LSU makes it official with in-house hires for their new OC. Former Bama O-Lineman Kaden Proctor heading back to Iowa, but was there tampering involved? Also, is Texas SEC ready? We'll discuss with Jonathan Davis of Locked On Longhorns. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what is happening, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. We got plenty to jump into. Let's discuss it. Let's go around the conference.
Boots out to the right. Takes the handoff. What a catch!
Around the conference.
And we start over at LSU as Brian Kelly has finally made a decision on his new offensive play caller, OC, to replace Mike Denbrock, who left for Notre Dame this offseason. Of course, during the ReliaQuest Bowl against Wisconsin, Brian Kelly went with a couple of in-house interims in quarterback coach Joe Sloan and wide receivers coach Cortez Hankton, making them co-OCs for the bowl game. They did very well. LSU won the game. The offense looked good with Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback. And thus, Joe Sloan and Cortez Hankton officially named co-offensive coordinators. Joe Sloan will be the primary play caller. Cortez Hankton will still coach the wide receivers, but that's coming from Matt Zenitz of 24/7 Sports. That'll leave tight end coach as the last remaining hole on LSU's coaching staff. But before the bowl game, Brian Kelly talked about the decision to go with both those guys. He said, I think it's important anytime you have vacancies, you evaluate the current staff you had. We had the number one offense in the country. For me not to evaluate these guys for these kind of openings, I would think would be foolish. There will be strong consideration for the coaches that are in leadership roles right now for that position. So he ends up going with it. Of course, Joe Sloan had called plays previously in Louisiana Tech, and Cortez Hankton coming over from wide receivers coach at Georgia prior to coming to LSU. But both guys going to take on co-OC roles there for LSU. We'll see if it works out for the Tigers. Now, they will be replacing the production of Jaden Daniels, who is heading off to the NFL draft, but Jaden Daniels continues to add to his trophy case. The LSU quarterback became the fifth straight quarterback from the SEC to earn the honor of winning the Manning Award. Also the third LSU honoree to win the award, but the Heisman Trophy winner got the Manning Award now in its 20th year from the Sugar Bowl Committee. And, of course, honors the football accomplishments of the Manning family from Archie to Peyton to Eli. It's the only quarterback award that takes into consideration the candidates' bowl and playoff performances in the balloting. Archie Manning saying in a news release, Jaden had an amazing year for the Tigers. Even without playing in the postseason, he still led the nation in total offense, ranked fifth in passing offense, accounted for 50 touchdowns. He was a thrill to watch every week, and we're looking forward to hosting him here in New Orleans to officially present him with the trophy. Of course, Jaden Daniels won nearly every award this past season. SEC Offensive Player of the Year, Louisiana Offensive Player of the Year, First Team All-American, Football Writers Association of America, First Team, Walter Camp, Sporting News, just about all of them. So incredible run there for Jaden Daniels, and best of luck to him at the next level. Over at Alabama, Kaden Proctor, one of the big stars from Alabama last year, five-star offensive lineman, started as a freshman. He is originally from the state of Iowa, and like we said, started all last season for Bama as a true freshman. But there were rumblings that maybe he could end up going back home to Iowa. This offseason entered the transfer portal and committed to return to his home state, go play for the University of Iowa, according to a video from Camille Gear, though. Proctor said there were no bridges burned between him and Iowa. He said it was easy for him to pick Iowa when he did enter the portal, saying, quote, even when I was doing bad and struggling in the SEC, Iowa still hit me up and said, we're proud of you. You're going to get through this. This is what ultimately helped me to my decision. They still believed in me. Feels good. As soon as I came in here, I saw everyone cheering me on. They're happy for me. I know I did leave and it hurt people's hearts and it equated to them showing hatred, but that's what every fan base does. So the question is, did Iowa maybe tamper with Kaden Proctor? Alphonse Taylor, former Alabama football player, took to social media to say, this sounds like tampering to me. Saying that folks from Iowa reached out to him mid-season when he was struggling in SEC play, saying, we're proud of you. I don't know if I go that far. I mean, look, he's a kid from Iowa. He was committed to Iowa, decided late in the game to flip to Alabama. You know, in hindsight, if he had to do it over again, maybe Kaden Proctor ends up picking Iowa. He's a hometown kid. And so I don't know if that's necessarily tampering. Other teams, coaches telling you, hey, keep your head up. We're proud of you. You're going to get through this. That just sounds like they're rooting for him. You know, I mean, hey, keep going at Alabama, doing your thing. Now, if there's anything in the DMs that say, hey, bro, you want to have a change of heart, come over here, then, okay, that's tampering. But, you know, this happens all the time. Guys who recruited different players. I mean, look, after the SEC championship game, Caleb Downs goes and hugs Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart has a moment with him, telling him, you know, hey, congratulations on a great game. You know, recruited him very well. And ultimately, when Caleb Downs entered the portal, he ends up at Ohio State and even end up going to Georgia. But, you know, look, relationships between coaches and guys, even if you didn't end up going to the school, you still have a good relationship with guys that spent so much time recruiting you. So Greg McElroy, he came out and addressed the, quote, in-season tampering and said, it is what it is. It is what it is at this point. He said a lot of people are all bent on a shape about tampering. Y'all, it's about relationships. It's all about relationships. Iowa stayed in touch with Kaden Proctor. Maybe he was a little homesick, and now he's going to go home. So I tend to agree there with Greg McElroy. Speaking of Greg McElroy, he's got the Always College Football podcast, and he says he has a hard time seeing 5 SEC teams making the playoff next year. As we know, we're going to expand to 12 teams in the playoff. But McElroy said he believes you should expect maybe 3 to 4 teams from the Big Ten and maybe the same for SEC teams. He said, I have a hard time envisioning 5. You got to think 3, maybe 4 from the Big Ten. You look at the SEC, I think 3 or 4 probably is most likely. And so he put a percentage shot on a bunch of SEC teams to make the playoff next year. He puts Georgia at a 90% chance to make the playoff next year. Texas at 70%. He lists Alabama at 70%. He said, I think they still have Jalen Milroe. They still have good quality young receivers. So I think Alabama will be huge players when the portal opens up as well. He lists Ole Miss as a 60% chance to make the playoff, LSU 55%, and Missouri at 50%. On the back end, Tennessee at 15% and Oklahoma at 10%. So a little bit more of your longer shots. But, yeah, if you're picking teams to make the playoff next year, I'd feel pretty good picking Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss. I don't know about Alabama. We're going to see how it plays out with Kalen DeBoer through the first part of the season. But, look, if they get through midseason, they're undefeated. Absolutely, Alabama has a chance to get in there. A little bit of sad news coming out yesterday. UGA, Georgia announced on Tuesday the passing of UGA 10, otherwise known as Q, died in Savannah on Tuesday morning. He was born back in May of 2013, started his tenure as Georgia's mascot in 2015 against Georgia Southern. He was retired following the 2022 season. UGA 11, also known as Boom, he took over before the G-Day spring game last year, but rest in peace, UGA 10. Over at Washington, kind of an interesting one here. Will Rogers, 24/7 Sports, Matt Zennett's putting out there, Washington quarterback Will Rogers is withdrawing from the transfer portal, and he's going to return to the Huskies, a source tells 24/7 Sports. Of course, he's the former Mississippi State quarterback, transferred to Washington this offseason to go play for Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer, of course, jumps ship and goes and takes the Alabama job, but Will Rogers entered the portal when Kalen DeBoer left, but sounds like he's going to withdraw. He's going to stick it out, stay with Washington. So best of luck to Will. We've had him on the show a handful of times, and again, wish him the best of luck. Over at Alabama, They picked up a quarterback, Gundy, son of Mike Gundy over there at Oklahoma State. He entered the transfer portal this offseason, picked Ohio as his landing spot, but was only committed to them for about 20 days. According to multiple reports, Gundy re-entered the portal as a grad transfer and took to social media to announce he committed to Alabama Tuesday afternoon. So Gundy going to add some depth to that Alabama room, according to the reports out there. All right, other stuff we got to get to. How about some draft news? Mel Kiper put out his latest NFL mock draft for ESPN, and he's got 10 SEC players set to go in the first round, including Jaden Daniels, LSU quarterback at number 2, Brock Bowers, Georgia tight end number 5, Malik Neighbors, LSU wide receiver at 6th, Dallas Turner, linebacker from Alabama, going 8th, Terrion Arnold, DB from Alabama, going 13th, LSU wide receiver Brian Thomas going 14th, Bama tackle J.C. Latham going 18th. Kamari Lassiter, the Georgia DB, going 20th. And then on the back end of the first round, Ennis Rakestraw, corner from Mizzou, going 31st. And Amarius Mims, Georgia tackle, going 32nd. So we'll see how it plays out. It's the first batch of mock drafts from Mel Kiper for the first round. But we'll see how many SEC guys end up going. It's always a lot. Over at South Carolina, Pete Lembo, we know, left as special teams coach over at South Carolina to go take the Buffalo head coaching job. In his introductory press conference on Tuesday, Lembo praised Shane Beamer, said, "I don't think I'm in front of you today if I didn't get the opportunity to go with Shane Beamer to the University of South Carolina. He's a great person. Many of you know about Frank Beamer and Shane. Shane is his son. They're both great people, had an incredible experience the last 3 years in Columbia." So shout out there to Shane Beamer. Over at Kentucky, Tim Couch giving some praise to the Kentucky program and Mark Stoops. Couch was on the Paul Feinbaum show on Tuesday and talked about the impact Mark Stoops has had on that program. He said, "Coach Stoops leveled the playing field for us, made us very consistent, respected football team over the last decade that he's been here, going to bowl games, consistently winning bowl games, putting guys in the NFL, recruiting at a high level. It is fun to be a Kentucky football fan now." So high praise there from Tim Couch. And a quick SEC baseball nugget. Todd Helton, officially elected into the National Baseball Hall of Fame on Tuesday, was in his 6th year on the ballot, joined Adrian Beltre and Joe Mauer, but the former Volunteer was named on 79.6% of the ballots, just passing the 75% threshold. Of course, was a two-sport standout at Tennessee, played both football and baseball for the Vols, served as Peyton Manning's backup back in 1994. And a little hoops nugget. Shout out to Lamont Paris in South Carolina. Monster home win over number 6 Kentucky last night. Columbia winning 79-62. The Gamecocks improved to 16-3 overall, 4-2 in SEC play, and they now have wins over Virginia Tech, DePaul, Notre Dame, Missouri, Arkansas, and now Kentucky. So certainly putting together a good, impressive resume. Now, Joe Lunardi did his latest bracketology earlier in the day yesterday. He's got Tennessee in as a 2 seed, Auburn in as a 3 seed, Kentucky in as a 3 seed, Alabama in as a 5 seed, Texas A&M as an 8 seed, Mississippi State as a 9 seed, and he's got South Carolina in the last 4 getting in. But you got to think, again, he did that before the win over Kentucky, so you got to think that helped their case. On the outside looking in, he's got Ole Miss and Florida right there in that mix. So we'll see what happens with those teams. Still plenty of a season to go, so plenty of time to get this thing. Thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your from next. We're going to talk about the Texas Longhorns. Our buddy Jonathan Davis will join us in just a sec. Well, first, this episode presented to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Look, the NFL playoffs are just about to come to a close. We're down to the final 4 AFC, NFC championships this weekend, and no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers, when you sign up, if you've never signed up before, you get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. Go check them out right now. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get signed up. Make your first bet a layup. And then once you get signed up, you got your account rocking and rolling. Go download the FanDuel app. Super easy to use. Plenty of different ways to get in. They got this live same game parlays. They got the Parlay Hub. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. All of it is there for you, easy to use. But again, make sure you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's going to get you the special promotion. And then you can head on over to their app and take advantage of all the daily action there for you. It is FanDuel. They are the official partner of the NFL. Going along here, Locked On SEC, and look, as we're getting ever so closer to spring ball and looking ahead to next season, we'll be kind of catching up with a lot of our different Locked On hosts and getting kind of the state of their team as we head into another season of SEC football, just a couple of months away. And joining the SEC this year will be the Texas Longhorns, and nobody better to get in than our buddy Jonathan Davis, host of Locked On Longhorns. And they are ready to come into the SEC. It was funny. I heard somebody the other day saying, they're not really a member yet. They're still playing basketball in the Big 12. They still have to play a baseball season in the Big 12, softball and all that. But come this summer, they are in. As far as football talk goes, they're in. I mean, they're done with the Big 12. So, Jonathan, welcome in, man. How has your it's been a busy offseason so far for the Longhorns, and it hasn't been very long.
Yeah, we get into the offseason and, being on Locked On, being a daily show, you start to think about, like, once the season is ending, all right, what am I going to talk about in the offseason? But thankfully, Steve Sarkisian has been, so on fire with the transfer portal and all of the recruiting that I haven't had to really think too hard about what I'm going to talk about because it feels like we're getting a commitment every other day. So thankful that Steve Sarkisian and his ace recruiters have given me a lot of content to talk about on Locked On Longhorns, but definitely killing it in the recruiting game. He said on an interview, adapt or die. And this current era of, the NIL and the one-time transfer rule. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find too many coaches that have adapted better than Steve Sarkisian to the current era of modern football, college football, I should say.
Yeah, we're going to get to some of the guys that they've added through the portal here. But first, I got to ask you, because I've been asking everybody this, where were you and what was the reaction when you hear the news a couple of weeks ago, Nick Saban stepping away from college football and retiring?
I was at home, and it's one of those things, like, when you get the notification on your phone, especially now, like, as being on Twitter as much as I am, I'm thinking like, oh, okay, this is a parody post, like, or this is fake, right? I have to go see if there's a blue check mark. I have to go make sure that the spelling is right on the Twitter handle, right? And it's like, oh, Nick Saban really retired, right? And I was just shocked, appalled. I put it in the perspective of my life. I'm 30 years old right now currently. Like, I'm a semi-old man in the workforce, right? I was a freshman in high school when Nick Saban started at Alabama. Like, I was a junior in high school when Texas lost in the national championship and Nick Saban got his first at Alabama. And now I'm 30 years old. So, I mean, for half my life, it seems like Nick Saban has been at Alabama. And now, moving forward, it'll be Kalen DeBoer. And it's just crazy, like, how much of a shift it's caused, right? Like, he leaves Alabama and then, half of their players decommit or enter the portal. And then Kalen DeBoer comes over from Washington, and then they have an exodus on their players, and then the Arizona coach replaces them, and now Arizona's program is, in flux, and then San Jose State. Like, it's just crazy how much movement and how many dominoes one man has caused, in Nick Saban's retirement. But all the credit in the world to, arguably the GOAT in the sport. It's sad. Obviously, this gives opportunity to other schools to take over that spot and, be more competitive long-term in college football. But as a college football fan, you hate to see somebody who's meant so much to the sport, and Nick Saban walk away. And I think that, it kind of gives credence to, something else that we've talked about in terms of like a smaller conversation, right? We've seen a lot of historical coaches, whether it be in basketball or football, walk away recently, right? Like we saw Coach K, we saw Jay Wright, we saw Roy Williams, and now we're seeing Nick Saban. I'm probably forgetting somebody in football, but we've seen, some of the most historical coaches of our lifetime walk away recently. And a lot of talk has been about, this current era pushing coaches away, right? Like a lot of people will joke and say, now that everybody's getting Dodge Chargers, Nick Saban doesn't want to coach anymore, right? But I think there is, right, like some truth to, what made college football special, what made college football appealing to the fans was that passion, right? That undying passion. You knew in the NFL or these professional sports that people were getting paid, and, that probably took away some of the passion, energy, and effort from the sport and the product that you were seeing. But that amateurism, people just playing for their college, for pride, for their area, for their region, I think that was the main appeal of college football. And I think now that it's become more professional, it's become more about money, it's become more about opportunity, it's become more about self than team. I do think that has pushed some of the greatest coaches in the sport, basketball and football, away. And I think part of that is why Nick Saban walked away from the game, when I think he still has so much to give.
Yeah, I think a lot of people said it was the having to re-recruit the roster every offseason. I mean, the people, look, talk about, coaches coming and leaving, commitment to kids, whatever. But like typically it used to be when a kid committed to you, I mean, it's what they say, the Under Armour game, for the next 3 to 4 years, I'm going to. So, once you get that kid, you're like, all right, we got him at least 3 years. We don't have to worry about that position. And I've been in some of these offices where they've had the depth charts for the next 3 years set up. Well, now it's like you really can't think past 1 year. Like you can lose your entire roster after 1 year, and having to re-recruit kids every offseason. I think Saban just said, I'm done with it. I can't do this. I don't have the time or the patience, being his age. And it's funny, you mentioned, older coaches, Mac Brown. I mean, how is he still going to North Carolina? I thought he would have hung it up by now, but you're right. I do think we're going to start to see this continue. Let's talk a little bit about the aftermath, because whereas, one team is down, another team jumps in and takes advantage. And Sark and the Texas Longhorns certainly did that in jumping into the portal, first getting Kendrick Blackshire, the linebacker from Alabama, and then two big-time playmakers for Bama this past year, wide receiver Isaiah Bond and tight end Amari Niblack. Just talk about those additions and what those guys are going to bring next year.
Yeah, so I love the addition of Kendrick Blackshire, because I think more than just on the football field, it shows where Texas is currently as a program, right? We've seen for over a decade some of the best talent in the state of Texas leave the state of Texas or go to other institutions in the state of Texas outside of the flagship university, because they felt like there was their best chance to win football games in college, and that was their best chance to be developed at the next level. So now imagine a linebacker leaving the University of Alabama to come back to the University of Texas, where he's from, because he feels like that's his best chance to get development and play at a high level in the NFL, right? It's crazy. You wouldn't have thought of that 3 years ago. And 3 years ago, he obviously made the right decision to go to Alabama rather than going to the University of Texas. And then you talk about somebody in Amari Niblack and Steve Sarkisian's system, and I'm so excited to see it, especially when you lose a player like Jatavian Sanders, that move tight end that, creates so many mismatches for everybody on the field. Steve Sarkisian has said on record that tight end is the second most important position in his offense. And we know that this offense, as flashy as it is on the outside, still specializes in the run game and still specializes in 12 personnel with two tight ends. And I think, Niblack can be an underrated blocker as well. So averaged 16.4 yards per reception last year. 25% of his receptions went for over 20 yards. Very explosive. Excited to see him take that to the next level in Steve Sarkisian's offense. And of course, Isaiah Bond, who looks like the Xavier Worthy replacement, right? And I think he made the biggest play in college football last year. You cover the SEC. You can either co-sign this or not. 4th and 31 in the Iron Bowl on the road, with the college football playoffs on the line, SEC championship on the line. I don't think it gets bigger than that. So, I think the most catches Xavier Worthy ever had in a season was 75. I think the most yards he ever had in a season was 1,014. I'm looking for Isaiah Bond to break both of those metrics this season under year 3 Quinn Ewers and Steve Sarkisian.
It's going to be fascinating to see what both of those guys do. A couple more minutes here with our buddy Jonathan Davis, host of Locked On Longhorns, in just a sec. Continue our conversation with Jonathan Davis, host of Locked On Longhorn. Jonathan, it's interesting. I've had a lot of people asking, are the Longhorns SEC ready? Obviously to have the season they just did, they appear SEC ready, but in your opinion, are the Longhorns SEC ready?
Yeah, I think they are. And I really don't get the argument on why they would not be. Like, I think there's just a bunch of people like kicking the can down the road that said, oh, Texas is going to fall like they usually do in the Big 12, or people saying we only did what we did this year in the Big 12. And I think undoubtedly, like, the SEC is a tougher conference. Like, I do think it means more, as cringy as that, that slogan is, right? But Texas went on the road. Like, and I'm not trying to just keep, beating this horse, but like Texas went on the road to Tuscaloosa and beat the SEC champion. When we talk about the SEC being tough, it's always the top, right? We're not talking about Vanderbilt. We're not talking about Mississippi State. We're not talking about Florida right now, or those programs at the bottom. Like, we're talking about the very top, and they beat Alabama. I'm not sure if they can beat Georgia next year, but it would be a very competitive game. If they were to play Ole Miss, LSU, anybody, it would be very competitive. When you look at the way they've recruited, over the last, 3-4 years in the high school ranks and in the transfer portal, I think only Georgia and Alabama have out-recruited them, right? And I think in the transfer portal, they've out-recruited both of those schools. They were one of the 4 best teams in the country this year, right? And I think if they didn't fumble the ball 2 times, they're probably playing in the national championship against Michigan. So I just don't really get the argument that Texas is not SEC ready. I know some people say that it's not playing the Georgias and the Alabamas, but it's the SEC schedule week in and week out. And, maybe I'm, underestimating a full SEC schedule. Obviously games at Arkansas and at Texas A&M are going to be tough next year, but I just don't see how you can look at this Texas program, what they're building, what they've built over the last 3 years, and say they're not ready to compete in the SEC. Like, I just don't get that, especially with the win over Alabama on the road, in Tuscaloosa. And then when I look at, my bad. Yeah. And then, you know what I mean? Like I said, when I look at the way they've recruited the last 3 years, the best players like on the field typically win in college football, right? Like that's usually what it comes down to. The best players on the field typically win in college football. And Texas is never going to go into a season where they play more than, 9 or 10 games where they're not the best, or excuse me, I shouldn't even say that. They're never going to go into a season where they play 3 or 4 games where they're not the most talented team on the field, right? Like more times than not, Texas is going to be the most talented team on the field. Coaching remains to be seen. Culture remains to be seen. Resiliency, that remains to be seen. And we won't see that until they get into the SEC. But based on what we can see right now and what we saw this year, they're absolutely ready to go into that conference and be one of the best teams in that conference.
Yeah, the obviously a big test in week 2 for Texas next season going to Michigan, but sounds like Jim Harbaugh may be in the NFL and they'll have a new coach there. So maybe
quarterback,
that game gets a little bit easier. But your first road, true road conference game in the SEC is at Vanderbilt. I mean, that's about as easy as you can get for Texas, and only 3 with playing Oklahoma neutral field, only 3 road SEC games next year, at Vandy, at Arkansas, and at A&M to finish off the season. So the toughest one there might be the last one of the season. So it's schedule certainly sets up for Texas. Of course, they've got to get Georgia. They get Georgia coming to Austin this year. It's fascinating to see that one. One more for you, Jonathan. I got to ask you, because this kind of grabbed the headlines a week ago with Rodney Terry, the basketball coach, taking exception to horns down. I got to be honest, a lot of the perspective from a lot of SEC fans was, oh man, if they're getting their feelings hurt on this, wait till they get to the SEC. Every fan base is going to be throwing horns down. I guess, where are you on the horns down? Do you hate it? Because look, if Longhorns fans keep telling the SEC, hey, we can't stand it, well, guess what? You're going to get it everywhere you go next year.
Yeah, I think the misconception, and I think the horns down thing goes into like the whole narrative of Texas, like, the crybabies, they're soft, the wine and cheese fans. So the horns down is like, then it became a penalty, you know what I mean, in the Big 12, which is absolutely egregious. So that's just a bad look on us. Mac Brown complained about it. So I think that Texas fans have been fighting the horns down stigma for a long time, right? Because it was like, based on the actions of other people, it made it seem like we were soft and we couldn't take other people doing hands down when it's competition. Like, we get it. Like, it's a recognizable hand sign everywhere you go. Of course, people are going to throw it down. I don't think Texas fans have a problem with it. I think Texas fans' problem with it is the narrative that we're soft and we get in our feelings because people are throwing horns down. Like, we understand it's competition. I think what Rodney Terry did was add unnecessary fuel to the fire, because right now, it's been over a week and we're talking about it on Locked On SEC. They were talking about it on national, program. And I saw Joel Klatt weigh in. Like, he doesn't even cover college basketball. Like, he tweeted about it. And so I think Rodney Terry, unfortunately, they had lost a tough game. They'd had a tough season up until this point. Great win on Saturday against a top 10 Baylor team. Started off 1-3 in conference, 0-2 at home. You blow a 17-point lead to UCF, right? And so you're already dealing with that emotionally. And then now they're jumping up on your logo, throwing the horns down, and, in his words, celebrating like they won a national championship. So I think he was just emotional. I think he, got too ahead of himself, tried to coach another team and tried to tell another team how to win instead of worrying about why his team lost and blew a 15-point lead. But if you're asking what the general consensus is of the Texas fan base about horns down, we don't care. We don't care who in the SEC is going to throw it up. And we feel like when we get to the SEC, most teams won't have the opportunity to throw it up because we're going to be winning the majority of our games.
Nice. I like that. I like that perspective. Of course, November 30th, that is going to be the one with the Longhorns going back to College Station. And I'm sure win or lose, the Aggies will be throwing it down. It's still fast. songs, but the songs for both schools are about saw varsity's horns off and all this kind of stuff. It's just fascinating that both fan bases. This is a rivalry that had to be renewed, so thank God we are getting it back. This is Jonathan
absolutely.
Davis. Jonathan Davis, host of Locked On Longhorns. Let everybody know where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, Jonzo Ball, like Lonzo Ball, the personal Twitter, Locked On Horns, the Longhorn Twitter, and then Locked On Longhorns, wherever you get your podcasts, audio, or on YouTube. You can also find me next year in the SEC championship game, wherever it's at, right, with Texas facing off whoever we plan to beat that day.
Wherever it's at. It's in Atlanta, all right? It's not going anywhere. You guys y'all have to search directions to Atlanta. Y'all never been there before. So we'll see if the Longhorns are there. He is Jonathan Davis, host of Locked On Longhorns. Thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. For your second listen, you can go check out Jonathan, Locked On Horns. You can go check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on the YouTube channel. We will talk to you guys tomorrow right here on Locked On SEC.